Got the Chargers and the Raiders tonight. Justin Herbert was somebody who was looked at as a top 5 quarterback in fantasy football on a nearly weekly basis. And now all of a sudden, because the cold streak that he snapped, I've gotten a ton of questions this week on whether to start Justin Herbert or someone like a Taysom Hill. So we're going to talk about that game and much more. But Herbert's sake, I have him at QB 13, meaning he is not a must start for me. Now he's in that top, what we would call streamer territory, but Herbert hasn't been a streamer this year. He's been a guy that you've depended upon. And it's a great matchup on paper, but here's the problem. He had a great matchup on paper against the Atlanta Falcons, didn't do as much as I expected him to. That was the last time that I'm going to have him ranked inside the top 5, was against the Atlanta Falcons after disappointing there. Now, I know the Falcons defense has been playing a little bit better as of late, but still. It's still not a defense that they shouldn't be able to throw the ball on. He hasn't been as aggressive throwing the football, especially down the field, since Austin Eckler has returned. It's as if Eckler came back into the game plan and they said, you know what? Instead of taking those shots downfield that was really opening up the offense and making us explosive and making you look really good in the process, we got to make sure you check the ball down to Eckler at least double-digit times, it seems like, because Eckler's accumulating as many targets as Keenan Allen is. And while Eckler is a weapon and while he needs to be involved in the passing game, there's no doubt about that, it can't come at the cost of taking away the explosive factor, the down-the-field throws of the offense. And let's factor that all into tonight's game where you have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams who are going to be true game-time decisions. And even if they play, they're talking about Keenan Allen possibly being limited. Now, as far as Keenan Allen himself goes, because I fielded a couple questions this morning on this too. If Allen suits up against the Raiders, you have to play him. Because even an Allen who's at 75% is still a high-end wide receiver 2 in this matchup against the Raiders, because he's still going to be dependent upon as far as the number one target, the number one wide receiver target for Justin Herbert throughout this game. And it's still a good matchup. You're going to have to go to him. He's going to get close to double-digit targets regardless of the status of his hamstring, as long as he's able to stay out there on the field. And from what I understand, that had this been a regular game, where a regular Sunday to Sunday game, they would have expected Allen to be okay come this Sunday. Obviously, because he's playing on Thursday. But more of the point was that it's not something serious. He's just sore. He's just a bit banged up at the moment. He's not going to be 100% himself. So that's kind of the issue. But so as far as Keenan Allen goes, you fire him up. I still have him. He can still finish as a wide receiver 1 in this week's matchup. Now, but where does that relate to Justin Herbert? Well, the down-the-field throws aren't going to be there. Mike Williams, I think, is a long shot to play in my estimation. They really didn't think he was even going to have a chance to play when this week started out. Now it seems like he's recovered enough to the point to at least make it a game-time decision. But even if he does, Herbert has not been throwing the ball down the field since they brought Austin Eckler back into the vault. If you're not going to take shots against the Raiders, what kind of ceiling do you have? Because he hasn't been running either. There hasn't been that base 20, 30 rushing yards that he was getting to kind of boost his floor every single week to go along with it. Why he stopped running, that part I don't understand. Again, that could have something to do with checking the ball down to Eckler as well. Why run when you can throw the ball 3 yards out to your running back here? But he's got to start running. He's got to start moving his legs. Now, here's what I will say. If he has a busted up Keenan Allen and a busted up Mike Williams, or if he doesn't have them at all, I think he will be forced in more situations to use his legs to move the chains tonight. I think there's a chance we see his scrambling ability tonight. But that's too much of a risk heading into your Week 15 fantasy playoff matchups. And while I want nothing more than to play the guy that you've been leaning on to this point against the Raiders, if you have other options like a Taysom Hill, I'm looking to go that way. If you have other options like a Ryan Tannehill, I'm looking to go that way. Depends what you have out there. He's still QB 13, so it's going to depend on what's available to you, but he's not a must-start. Now, Eckler, we talked a lot about him screwing up the offense, or at least screwing it up for Justin Herbert. He and himself, I have him as a top 5 running back this week. I mean, we just talked about it with Allen and Mike Williams and not knowing the exact status of them. The only person I know for sure is going to be healthy going into this game is Austin Eckler. The only person I know for sure is going to get double-digit targets in this game is going to Austin Eckler. The only person I know for sure is going to get 15 carries at least in this game is Austin Eckler, playing against the Raiders. Don't really think you have to dissect it more than that. So Austin Eckler is a must-play in this one. Hunter Henry, I like him a lot. again, it goes back to the injuries to the wide receiver position. He's already somebody who has carved out 5 to 7 targets a game for himself anyway, and he's been targeted more so in the red zone. There's no Mike Williams. Hunter Henry will get leaned on when they're in scoring position. So I do like Hunter Henry a lot. He comes in at tight end 13 for me this week. I think that could even be too low. I might have to boost him up before this game starts into the top 12 because he could be looking at a tight end 1 performance. So I do like Hunter Henry quite a bit here in this matchup if you have him. Let's move to the Raiders side of the ball. They have some issues in their own right? They've had some COVID-19 issues. Henry Ruggs, Bryan Edwards, both not going to play in this game. In a way that really helps a guy like a Nelson Aguilar, because in this offense, there's not always a ton of targets for the wide receivers. Because Darren Waller is the number 1 pass catcher of this team, and he gobbles up so much of the attention on the offense, it's kind of hit or miss exactly if there's going to be a lot of volume there for the wide receivers, because it could also be a game where we've seen Nelson Aguilar or Hunter Renfrow really gobble up the targets, but we've also seen games where Derek Carr spread it out pretty evenly amongst the wide receivers when they're all healthy and active, and then Darren Waller's the lead pass catcher. Well, you take Hunter Renfrow and Bryan Edwards out of the picture completely right off the bat, then all of a sudden, you have nothing but Nelson Aguilar and Hunter Renfrow left. Now, this isn't a good matchup. I know the Chargers' defense has been inconsistent, especially in the secondary, but for the most part this season, Casey Hayward's been pretty good against number 1 wide receivers. I know Calvin really just had a good game last week, but for the most part, they've been pretty good against number 1 wide receivers. And Chris Harris is back against Hunter Renfrow. So the only guy to me that has a mismatch here is Darren Waller. Now, if the Chargers decide that they want to go ahead and stick a Chris Harris on a Darren Waller in some situations, which they might, then Hunter Renfrow would actually be the guy with the mismatch in that situation. But it's Casey Hayward's going to stay with Nelson Aguilar. Not that Aguilar can't still have a good game, because he still might actually be looking at more volume this particular week than he normally would. And over the past month, he's had a pretty good stretch. He's had a stretch of 6, 5, 4, 6 catches, or 5 catches last week. He's been targeted pretty consistently over the last month. He's had a little bit more of a floor where in the beginning of the season, he was purely a boom or bust option. Now he's got a little bit of a floor that you can kind of sink your teeth into. I got him at wide receiver 25, so I have him as a top end wide receiver 3 heading into the week. And that's because of the targets that he could be seeing. He easily could look at 8 targets plus in this game. And he's played very well. He's coming off a 100-yard touchdown performance from this past Sunday. And now with Ruggs out of the picture for this week, you know for sure that when they go to take a shot, it's going to be Nelson Aguilar in this one. So he has a boom potential heading into this matchup. So he's interesting in that flex position, that third receiver position, depending upon what your options are. I think he's a legitimate play. There's still a low floor because of the matchup. If the Chargers secondary comes to play, there's still a low floor when it comes to Nelson Aguilar. And I don't know if there's a worse feeling in the world as a fantasy football player than when you go out on a limb for a guy who's a boom or bust and he busts for you on Thursday night. The entire rest of the weekend, all you feel like is that you're just having this inevitable doom cloud just drifting over your head because you feel like you have no shot to win because you already blew your nut on Thursday night. Now, I've seen teams come back time and time again, and that one player on that Thursday night game doesn't wind up sinking their entire matchup, but it gives you that feeling until Sunday, basically, that things might be over for you because that player busted out. It's hard to have that feeling when you're in the playoffs. Again, not going to be a deciding factor in who I play in my lineup because we're going to try to play the best players in the best situations that we possibly can available to us. But just a note, as a fantasy player, I understand that pain of that guy busting out on Thursday and what that does to the rest of your weekend. Now, this week, like we said, we got a couple Saturday games, so maybe you got some guys in there that can kind of rebound you back a little bit quicker than normally would. But still, Aguilar kind of fits that mold. He's still a boom or bust guy, but with a higher floor than what he necessarily had earlier on in the season. So he's an option, depending on what you have. Darren Waller, of course, he's my tight end 2 in the week. He's going to be in the top 3 tight ends every single week. You're good with Darren Waller. The other guy we got to talk about is Josh Jacobs. He comes in at RB11 for me. Again, when we talk about rankings, if you're new to the show, we talk about it from a half-point PPR standpoint. And you can always check out these rankings for full point, half point, or standard on BellyUpFantasySports.com under the rankings and go to search weekly rankings by Dan Mater. These are all options. Now, Josh Jacobs at RB11, he didn't look great Sunday, but he didn't look bad either. He looked like maybe he was a few more days away from getting back to his explosiveness. Here's the good news for the Raiders that their offensive line with Trent Brown finally being off the COVID list is back intact. That was the first week for Trent Brown being back. I think a couple days later, they'll be a little bit better, a little bit more in shape, a little bit more over the illness. Kind of getting back acclimated again. I know it's a short week. You would have liked to see it be a full week to really get the full grasp of that. But the Chargers have been good matchups for running backs, especially as of late. They've been very inconsistent in that area. And this Raiders offensive line is going to be back in its second game together in a while. I think Josh Jacobs should at least have the opportunity to score a touchdown in this game. I think he'll be leaned on more heavily in this game as well. I think the Raiders are looking to get back to that. Remember, last week they're playing against the Indianapolis Colts, which have been very tough matchup for running backs all throughout the year. And he still only wound up with 13 carries because the game script got out of hand for the Raiders, especially in the second half. I expect this game tonight to be within a score one way or another for the majority of the night, meaning it should stay pro game script for Josh Jacobs all throughout. And the one good thing that you take out of last week is that Jacobs was targeted, I believe, 5 times last week. So he got involved in the passing game aspect as well. I feel good about Jacobs making a return to his low-end RB1 value heading into this matchup. I'm not streaming Derek Carr. I don't think I have to go any further than that. It's too much of a hit or miss project here. If he hits, great, but I'm not taking the chance in there. I don't even have him inside my top 18, which means he's not a streaming quarterback in my mind. Let's move on. Let's talk about our first Saturday matchup, which is going to be the Buffalo Bills and the Denver Broncos. Josh Allen, even though from a fantasy perspective didn't light up the scoreboard last week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he's back to playing football the way he was earlier on the season. We had that little stretch there where maybe he wasn't 100% healthy, where he started to look like the Josh Allen of old. He started to look like the Josh Allen of last year, not playing very efficient quarterbacking. But even though he didn't light up the scoreboard against the Steelers the way he did against the 49ers the week before, the demeanor, the control, the ball placement, all those things that you saw Allen catapult himself into a top 3 quarterback over were all there. He played well, plain and simple. You're going up against the Denver Broncos, which are on their backups of their cornerback positions. Stefon Diggs has been open all season long for Josh Allen. He'll have a good opportunity to use his legs in this game. Josh Allen's a top 4 quarterback. Like, again, we don't have to spend a lot of time on him because you're definitely going to start him anyway. But just to make sure we emphasize the confidence that we have in him. Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, not playing him. I have him just outside the RB3 territory. I don't know at this point why you would. And at this point in the season, unless one of them gets hurt in this game, I don't know why you own them. They were worth a value stash throughout the year, waiting to see if one of them would take over, one of them would get injured. But now that we're in week 15, and I would say about 80% of the leagues out there are going to have their championship next week. When are you going to be playing a Zach Moss or a Devin Singletary? There's no reason to own these guys. So we don't care about the running back field unless something were to drastically change heading into week 16. And in which case we would talk about that in next week's shows. Stefon Diggs, obviously must play, obviously wide receiver 1. I don't know if there's been a receiver this year who's had a higher floor than a Stefon Diggs all season long. Number 1, he's been healthy all season long. Number 2, he's gotten more targets than I think almost anybody in the year, because every single week this guy is getting 8 to double-digit targets and plus, and he's been getting, 7 to 9 plus receptions with 70 to 90 to 100 to plus whatever yardage. I mean, he's been an incredible player all year long. While he hasn't had those big Stefon Diggs, I win you the week by myself, he hasn't had too many of those this year. He's still gotten you more than what you bargained for when you drafted him, because he's been more consistent than anyone would imagine him being with Josh Allen at the quarterback position. And again, against Denver, backup corners, Stefon Diggs should have a great game.